Another watch video for you. I've done videos on several watches. A lot of people seem to notice the watches that I wear in my videos, and I do admittedly have a bit of a bad watch habit, as it were. And I love my fancy watches, but I started looking around because I wanted a watch that had a little bit more functionality than just, the date and the time. And also I wanted something that was a little bit rougher, something I could beat up a little bit and not be so concerned about. And also something most specifically that I could use for hiking, trekking, camping, that type of thing, that I wouldn't feel bad about taking an expensive watch on and having something happen to. I was going to get a G-Shock. That was really what I knew about digital watches. It's been a long time since I had a digital watch, and I thought I'd get a G-Shock because it seemed like a tough, good digital watch, good value for the money. And I started looking around and I learned of this class of watches called ABC watches, altitude, barometer, compass. My dad has Suntos, a couple Suntos, and he really likes them a lot. And I considered those, but one of the concerns that I had with the Suntos that he experiences the abysmal battery life. I've heard some people recently more so that the battery life is not an issue for them, but he was changing his battery every 4 months. And I didn't want to be out on some hike or trek or something where I was out for a week or 10 days or more and have the watch die on me. And that kind of steered me away a little bit from the Suntos. They're also a little bit bigger. And looking around a little bit more, I came across the Casio ProTrek series. There are a bunch of models in this series. The most recent of them has the 3rd generation sensor. It's apparently 95% smaller than the previous generations. And the one that I picked, the Casio ProTrek PRW3000. Now this watch comes in a bunch of colors. This is just the basic black. There's one with an orange band, a pink band, blue band. There's also one with a negative dial. This is the regular dial. The negative dial has a black dial with the light colored numbers. And I thought that watch looked super cool, but I had concerns with how the readability of it was going to be, especially in low light. So I just went with the basic, normal, regular dial, and here it is. Overall, I love this watch. I've taken it to a bunch of places. It's been hiking in the Grand Canyon with me. It's been camping in Rocky Mountain National Park with me. And ultimately, this will be the watch that I take when I go up to Everest Base Camp. And it's great. It's lightweight, it's small, it's tough. It has a ton of functionality. And one of the other great features is that with my sort of fancier Swiss watches, I can never keep straight whether I've changed the date that month or not. So is the date right? I don't know. With this watch, it has a perpetual calendar set through 2099, so it probably won't be an issue. And I know the date is always correct on this, which I like. The other thing that drew me to this watch over the Suntos is that this watch is solar powered. Around the edges here, there is a ring, and that powers the watch. When the battery is fully powered, it will go for about 7 months if it didn't have a light source. And also, if this watch is set down and it's in the dark for a while, it'll actually go into a little bit of a power save mode. The dial goes blank, and when you pick it up, it comes back on. Another thing that drew me to this watch over the Sunto or some of the other watches is that this watch syncs up with the atomic clock. It does that in the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, and China. In the United States, that clock is in Fort Collins, Colorado, and it'll sync up with that clock up to 5 or 6 times a day. It usually does it early in the morning, somewhere between midnight and 4 a.m. or so. Apparently that's when the signal is the best. And so it keeps very accurate time. Without being synced up, this watch is rated at plus or minus 15 seconds per month. That's with no calibration. But otherwise, with calibration, don't have to worry about that. So I like that. I also like the size of it. This watch, if you look at the websites, is listed as a 46 millimeter watch. And 46 in regular watches is huge. I have a 6.5-inch wrist, and I would never buy a 46 millimeter watch. However, realistically, this watch is not what most people would consider a 46 millimeter watch. Just to show you, so if you look at just the dial itself is about 30 millimeters. If you go edge to edge of the bezel, that's about 40 millimeters. And if you really go to the pure edge from the sensor out here, out to the other end of this button, that's where you get to about that 45, 46 millimeters. But that's not, it doesn't wear that way. It doesn't wear as a watch that's that big. It wears, just for a size reference, a lot of people, while you may not have one, are at least familiar. They've seen a Rolex Submariner and they have a general idea of how big it is. And overall, I'd say this watch wears fairly close to the same size, whereas closer to a 42, somewhere in that millimeter watch. The weight on this watch is 4.6 ounces. This watch is 2.3 ounces, so it's wispy light. If you're used to wearing heavier steel watches, and this is not a heavy watch by any means, but you get one of these watches, resin band, and this thing is just wispy light. It's super comfortable. I actually liked it so much that I was looking around and, well, I got a second one. I saw this one, the color looked kind of snazzy, and I thought, well, that's kind of neat. A little bit more exciting than just that boring black. So I picked this up. This one is rated, sold, called, it's blue. My only issue with this is that if you just kind of glance at it, it does look kind of blue, but it's a bit on the purple side. It has some sort of, a bit, I'd say, periwinkle in it. And actually the head and the bracelet are slightly different in color, if that'll come across in the camera. The head is just a little bit more purple than the bracelet. I thought about sending it back because it looks kind of purple, but on casual glance, it looks blue enough that I don't mind it. It's at least not the pink one. So I like it. I'll keep it. This will probably be the watch I take with me to Everest just because it's a little bit more exciting than the black one. These watches, they'll sync up with the time, and the other nice thing, you can see the watches run pretty much exactly the same when they sync up. This one last synced a couple days ago. This one synced this morning. So it's, you know, a quarter of a second off or so. You can see the second hands, I was going to say. The seconds there. All that said, let's have a look now at all the cool functions that this watch has. So of course on the main screen it has the time. Up on the top here it has the date. The date can be altered between a few different settings. The month and the day, the barometer, sort of a graph of the barometer, and the day of the week and the day, whichever you prefer. Obviously there's the date here. This little triangle up here means that it's recently synced with the atomic clock, and then down here obviously the second hand. This M here, there's an M and an H. It rates the level of charge. I'm not quite sure what M and H stand for even after I read the manual. The manual, by the way, it's a thick manual. This is, 10 languages worth, but I definitely recommend reading it because you'll miss a bunch of the functions that this watch has unless you read the manual. So definitely recommend that. The watch has several buttons. The adjust button here is used to adjust most of the settings on each of the different screens. Over on the right here, the ABC buttons, altitude, barometer, compass. You can see they're labeled compass, barometer, and altitude. Just showing you. So the altitude, one of the things, sort of the downsides of these altitude watches is that they are measured by a barometric pressure. So while my room here might be 600 feet today, tomorrow it might be 700 based on the pressure. So what you really need to do to get a true altitude is when you're somewhere at a known altitude, you can set this and say, I am here, this altitude, and then you'll get sort of a reference range from that. Only downside, there's really no other way it could work, but that's how the altitude works. The barometer, it'll give you the current barometer reading, it'll give you a graph up here. On the barometer setting here, it gives you a temperature down here. Temperature degrees Fahrenheit, you can set it to Celsius if you like. This is not going to be accurate if you have it on your wrist because it's going to take a measurement of your wrist temperature. This worked pretty well when I was camping. I would take my watch off at night and I would set it in the temp with me, and I'd wake up and I would see that it was 45 degrees and understand why it was so cold. But just note that you need to take it off and leave it off for a while to get an accurate setting. And then the compass, it'll give you a bearing here, the direction there, and as you turn it, you can see that north is over this way, the 3 dots. And as you can turn it, you can see the direction will stay. You can, of course, calibrate the direction as well once you figure out if you want a little bit more exact setting, but otherwise it does pretty well. There's a light down here. This button here is a light. Press it, and the light will come on. You can set it for 1.5 or 3 seconds. Moving through the different settings now. To move through, you use this bottom left button. Next screen is sunrise and sunset. You can see right here, sunrise, arrow pointing up, sunset pointing down. This is done based on latitude, so you may need to adjust. You can set the latitude of where you are. You may need to adjust that to get a little bit more exact time. Next screen, the recording screen or the data log screen. You can set this when you're going on a trek to record changes in altitude, and then you can go back and you can look at the log of it. Stopwatch, start it, stop, there's the reset. Up here, I initially thought this stood for Ohio, but no, that's 0 hours. It also always keeps the time down here on the bottom, so you can keep an eye on that. Next screen, this is the countdown timer. This is set for 1 minute. It goes from 1 minute up to 23, 1 minute up to 23 or 24 hours. I guess 23 hours, 55 minutes. And it'll count down. You can start it and it'll go on down from that. Next screen, the alarm. It has 4 daily alarms and 1 snooze alarm. I use this pretty well when I was out camping. It woke me up decently. It's loud enough. Next screen is the world time. Right now I have it set to Kathmandu, since that's where I'll be flying into for my Everest trek. Shows you the current time down here, of at least sort of your home time, and then up here you can cycle through the cities, Delhi, and if you're not sure with one of the cities, leave it there and it will kind of cycle through and tell you what the city is. And cycle back here, back to Kathmandu. Next screen, this is the receive. The last time it received a signal from the atomic clock, so you can see it recently received it October 8th at 1:03 a.m. You can do it manually or you can set it to do it automatically, whichever you prefer. And then back to the main screen. One of the other interesting things that you can hear, there's a little chirp when you go between each of the screen. The chirp when you go back to the main screen is up just a little bit higher. You can see the pitch is different change. Hear that? Higher pitch. So if you're doing this in the dark and you want to get it back to the main screen, you can do it blindly. Works out pretty well. Here's the case back. You can see made in Thailand. Has the model name on there. It's water rated down to a depth of 100 meters. Here it is with it on. It definitely wears a little bit smaller than those Suntos, which have a much bigger screen. It's wispy light. Doesn't sit up too high. I've had this thing, I've beaten my black one up more than I beat up this one. And some people note that the bezel will get a little bit dinged up. And you can see there's a little bit of wear here on the bezel. That's fine, I don't mind that. It gives a little bit of character, I think. Not really a big deal to me. That's where the sensor is right there. But otherwise, I really like this watch. Obviously, I like it so much that I bought 2 of them. And I find myself wearing these quite a bit, actually, even though I've got a bunch of fancy watches. I like these because they're light, they can take anything, they're accurate. They're great watches. Check them out, the Casio ProTrek PRW3000.